Okay, you're talking about Fullmetal Alchemist today. People really like this show. It's super popular. It's acclaimed. It's serious business. No messing about. This is the new you, where you make super long videos and everybody respects you and thinks you're smart. No low-hanging fruit. No goofing off. No memes. Hey! How did you get in here? Like so many people between the ages of 20 and 30, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood holds a very special place in my heart. It was my gateway anime. It's the all-time gateway anime, really. Classic shonen, good dub, lots of action, well-animated, no incest. It's got everything a boy in his early teens could want. But there's something I noticed as I grew into my tastes within the medium, and it's something I never really thought about that hard until recently. To this day, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is sort of the only shonen series I have room in my special place for. That sounds gross. It's not that I think the genre is beneath me, there's just something notably different about this particular series. And from the moment I noticed it, I absolutely had to rewatch the entire thing and hunt down what it was that stuck with me. Which, you read the title, so you already know, but it's the themes of guilt and sacrifice. I sat through 64 episodes of television to remind myself, once again, that I just like existential dread. But it's fun to run it back. I personally never get tired of treading this particular ground. So what's so special about the way guilt and sacrifice are handled in this one singular shonen? The great genre of friendship and breaking cycles of violence and the almighty therapy no jutsu. What could possibly constitute an interesting take on the pillars of mortal worth in this wasteland of optimism? Well, that's the thing. For a story that won't shut up about equivalent exchange, these two principles, guilt and sacrifice, are weirdly almost never in balance. Before I get into this, there is one concession I have to make immediately. Fullmetal Alchemist, the original 2003 show, the one where they branched off the story because the source material wasn't finished yet, does a much better job of introducing these themes. If for any reason you don't know, they adapted the first chunk of the story in full for that show and decided when they made Brotherhood less than 10 years later that they just shouldn't bother with it again. It's a little weird to assume your new audience has already seen the first version of this, but production is expensive, and I get it. The point is, the first 6 or so episodes of Brotherhood are definitely rushed, and while I won't deny it takes some of the air out of my thoughts, I just can't really treat this story as if I don't know what goes into the missing space. So take some of my praise with a grain of salt, is what I'm basically saying. Also, I'm not talking about the 2003 series again, so from now on, I'm referring to Brotherhood as Fullmetal Alchemist. Those extra syllables add up, and editing footage is not the part of this I really look forward to. So equivalent exchange, what a fun concept. It's a clever, catchy way of pseudo-spiritualizing the basic law of conservation of matter, which states that through any physical or chemical reaction, no matter can be gained or lost. In this case, more specifically, gained. One does not simply create things, only God can do that. And if you dare to play God, God will take one of your limbs, or your whole body if you're unlucky, or Scar might kill you, or just fuck up your face because he's in the middle of his redemption arc. There's really a lot of options, because playing God means a lot of different things to different people in this world. Now, Fullmetal Alchemist is not a religious story. It's a story that uses religious parallels to explore themes of the universality of flaw, the dangers of existential hubris, and the inherent value of the human spirit. But to explore them, we do have to sort of get our feet wet in the religious subtext. So follow me into the unaffiliated swamp of proto-theological literalism. The concepts of Amestrian alchemy and Shingi's alchemy are metaphors built on their theological inspirations. If you treat Xerxian alchemy, so I guess normal alchemy, as a true neutral, harnessing the power of tectonic shifts, it's pure science, or at least as pure science as this universe gets. Not necessarily spiritual, but similarly not sacrilegious. Shingi's alkahestry is a vague conglomeration of pantheistic ideas present in East Asian religions, philosophies, and traditional medicines. The concept of qi stands in as a semi-practical symbol for the collective human spirit, making alkahestry both religious and righteous within the universe. Not that I'm accusing Fullmetal Alchemist of any kind of Confucian superiority complex, it's just more convenient for the story this way. Amestry and alchemy, then, is a black mirror of Western monotheism, a thoroughly blasphemous practice in which all power is given by one, in this case specifically false god, and is born from death. The energy created by thousands of trapped souls writhing in constant agony is somewhat comically satanic, but more importantly, it positions Father as the ultimate false idol. Father, more like daddy, am I right? Nah, I'm just kidding. The hottest character is General Armstrong, and it's not even close. But the motif of the false idol is set up early in Lior with Father Cornello. Father, priest, miracles, do you get it? The hubris is really what matters here, as hubris leads to nemesis. And that's where I think they get really clever with it. Because nemesis for the false idol you would think would be God, but it's not. It's truth.
But nothing is as scary as the facts. Vaping can deliver toxic metals like nickel and lead into your lungs.
The poetic justice for Father is the understanding, or I guess lack of understanding to the bitter end, that he really just wanted to be human. For all his talk about vessels and freedom, God in this world is not a singular, perfect being. It was always impossible to become such. Well, metaphorically speaking anyway, he actually does do it for like 4-ish minutes. But in that sense, all of humanity, all of everything, I guess, the collective spirit is his nemesis, his god, truth.
But nothing is as scary as the facts.
Now, you may be looking at the timeline wondering just how long it's been since I mentioned guilt or sacrifice. But don't worry, it's all part of the plan. Daddy's plan, Father's plan. Because he never actually sacrifices his sacrifices. From very early on in the series, the Elrics and other alchemists of note are labeled as sacrifices, even told that's what they're being protected for. But they never really seem to believe they'll actually be killed. It's a weird little hiccup. The word used in Japanese literally means human pillar, but it is itself a real form of ritualistic human sacrifice, meaning it's definitely on purpose. So why the disconnect? Well, simply put, it's because Father doesn't care about people. Individually, not conceptually. Just stay with me. We tend to associate the idea of sacrifice with slaughter, and fuck if there isn't slaughter to go around in this show, but anything offered to God in turn for favor is, officially speaking, a sacrifice. On a metaphysical level, what forcing open all 5 of their gates at once amounts to is Father knocking on God's door with a bunch of asshole kids who TP'd his house and saying, "Hey, come beat them up with me." And then when God opens the door, Father unhinges his jaw and wholly consumes God like a python. The python who was the devil. It's not my best analogy, but you can't pretend it doesn't make sense. All throughout the series, hints that range from appropriately subtle to beat you over the head with it are dropped that the principles of alchemy are objectively flawed, that knowledge isn't everything, that power and divinity aren't intrinsically linked, and most importantly, that there is no appropriate price for truth.
Uh-oh. What? What the hell? It's truth!
The law of equivalent exchange is such an interesting principle to get stuck on because it doesn't apply to abstract metaphysical concepts. It is in fact safe to say that the only true equivalent metaphysical exchange in the whole story is Edward trading his own gate for Alphonse's soul. God doesn't take a specific toll for the sin of human transmutation. It takes whatever it feels serves you the hottest, steamiest plate of existential irony. As a form of righteous self-destruction, the implication is that it's above the simplicity of physical reaction. And so, in accepting the small-scale hubris of alchemy as a concept, Ed finds the right answer. His relationship to alchemy has already morphed beyond anything you could call a reasonable pursuit of knowledge. It's a symbol of temptation, if not obsession, and God's willingness to accept it as a sacrifice for the return of a soul suggests morality is the scale for metaphysical exchange. He's down a leg, which does kinda suck, but this trade effectively represents Edward moving on from his burdens. It also solidifies the notion that there is no true equivalent to our capacity for guilt. Our ability as humans to punish ourselves is quite literally defiant to the laws of nature. And I wish it were the most upsetting thing this symbolic through line implies, but it's not. Because like the exchange of abstract anima, the exchange of individual human lives over the course of this story doesn't conceptually follow any one-to-one quota. In the world of Fullmetal Alchemist, not all souls are created equal. I said before that I think the first few episodes are rushed, and I think most people would agree with that. But that doesn't mean they don't still hit some really high notes. No, I'm not talking about Nina, we already said no memes. The one I've always personally loved is when they're in Lior in the first episode and Ed explains the chemical composition of an adult human. It's a surprisingly harrowing moment hearing someone be so thoroughly cynical about the value of a soul. It's a jarring microcosm of the issue at hand. Humans are cheap, but does that make lives expensive? The irrefutable permanence of death is not an aspect of this story to be taken lightly. It's not just the big fat point of the entire first half of the plot. It also creates both a logistical imbalance and narrative tension revolving around what the word alive really means. Befitting of Western monotheistic religions, guilt is a weapon to be used by the homunculi. It's the unofficial eighth deadly sin, a unique flaw that besets only the best of people, and by extension, the most powerful of souls. The bottomless well of suffering the Elrics and other human sacrifices are willing to undergo for others is, by all accounts, directly proportional to their latent metaphysical energy. And that's the problem. By every metric, their lives are worth more than the average Amestrian jerk-off. They are vital to the mechanizations of the homunculi, physically more valuable than ordinary humans. But also, their eminence before God itself is actively apparent. Think about what that means within the universe, just for a moment. These are people of such immense spiritual import that they have brushed with actual divinity. The irony of sin being their point of contact aside, these people are prophets. It's absolutely bananas how important they are, and it's definitive proof, I would say, that it's very much a choice to acknowledge their providence. They're chosen specifically for the strength of their spirits, for their immense potential for individual sacrifice, to be not sacrificed, instead to be the conduits for millions of souls, a torrent of pain and suffering, the only such souls who could possibly withstand that sheer force of guilt siphoned through them. It's a very clever metaphor, I like it a lot, but again, it begs the question, does 1 million random people equal one of their loved ones? It's probably pointless to explore any remotely literal interpretations of a giant god-sucking matrix of death, but the sacrifices, especially the Elrics, are defined as characters by their guilt, which is not a bad thing. Take, for example, the best character in the series, Major Alex Louis Armstrong. We see time and time again throughout the series that his defining flaw is his sensitivity, which while there is nothing wrong with a fine-tuned muscle machine like him being emotionally vulnerable, there's a difference between being sensitive and being easily broken. As much as I adore everything this man says and does in the entire series, he has an undeniably weak constitution. He's a bit of a coward, not in the face of danger, but in the face of principle. You can tell he would never attempt human transmutation, not because he knows it's wrong, but because he doesn't have the gall to challenge the natural order. Edward is, by contrast, unafraid of basically anything except maybe more guilt. His biggest flaw is his pride, and his near-martyr complex is, in its own way, a form of hubris. It very much teeters on the line, sometimes serving as a symbol of courage and spiritual strength, but just as often presenting as childish, reckless, and yeah, obviously sinful. To the Elrics, every life is precious, and seemingly equally precious, at least to the extent that they won't kill anyone no matter the circumstances. The souls trapped in the Philosopher's Stones, the wretched life of the thing that was once Nina and her dog, even a couple death row inmates bound to suits of armor. It seems noble, but is it really wrong of the Briggs soldiers to blast the Drachman army off the face of the earth? To blindly fire their turrets into the advancing central troops? As sacrifices TM, the kind that gets to live, the Elrics have the luxury of being too important to die, not just as main characters, but within the world, to the extent that they know they can use themselves as human bait, because the homunculi want them to live. That's not a luxury Private No Name has when he sees King fucking Bradley walking into the front gate with his swords out like the Pale Rider. It's kill or be killed for Private No Name, for Scar, for Riza Hawkeye, and for all the normal people who did die throughout the story. And again, how the series reconciles with that fact is by having Edward give up alchemy. In their attempt to bring their mother back to life, the Elrics create a feedback loop of guilt, every life thereafter becoming more important, every awful person they encounter and failure to break the cycle making them more obsessive, especially Ed. They become pillars of humanity, which I now understand that's why they're called that. Their desire to self-sacrifice reaches a fever pitch to where they literally refuse to acknowledge a future in which they fail to stop the slaughter of Amestris. That said, a lot of people still die in this show, their stories only partially, if ever, told. Their sacrifice in the name of the dwarf in the flask practically insignificant in the grand scheme. Ed's involvement varies over the course of his life as a state alchemist, but his flaw of pride, his propensity for guilt, it's what drives him, for better or worse. To let it all go, to choose to become insignificant, even after quite literally saving the country and effectively killing a god, it's a release that you feel he hasn't necessarily earned, but always needed. It's just that now he's actually allowed to. In closing the feedback loop, Ed has finally balanced his guilt with his sacrifice. Still down a leg, but that's not a bad price to pay. It's an interesting stance to take on the human condition. Not only that we are nothing without the flaws that define us, which isn't an uncommon theme, but that the value of life is truly a matter of perspective. Fullmetal Alchemist doesn't really give a definitive answer on what the cost of a life is. What is worth sacrificing to defy the laws of nature? Worth sacrificing for freedom? Worth sacrificing even just to survive? What is guilt in the face of an uncaring universe? If all things are connected, why aren't all things equal? You can't answer these questions. You can't possibly hope to. You're too small, too insignificant, too trapped in your own vessel. All you can do is try to be better and value the one life you have and the lives of the people you love. And the one that you should love the most is Major Alex Louise Armstrong. That's right, I tricked you. This whole video was a Major Armstrong appreciation post. Tell me you don't love that big ass hunk of beef.